So for a number of years, the Florida State Seminoles have dominated the ACC and were the prohibitive favorite coming into this season to trounce through the regular season, which they haven't exactly done, but they're unscathed. Now they go to the ACC Championship Game against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets as a small favorite based on the Yellow Jackets are really coming on in latter weeks as the Seminoles have come close to faltering. We bring in Joey Weaver from the Rumble seat, Georgia Tech football on the SB Nation platform. Joey, let's dive right into it with some injury issues along the defensive front. And also Smelter, your leading receiver, 7 touchdown receptions, not playing in this game.
Yeah, Mark, it's good to be back, first of all. Yeah, Smelter went out in the Georgia game last week. It was kind of a freak play. He did what he does a lot of times and caught a ball and kind of shook a tackle and started running. Got tackled in the middle of the field, but there was a question as to whether he was down. Whistle never blew. He kind of started to get up, got tackled again. Not sure if it was the second one or the first one or what, but sometime in the midst of that play, yeah, he went out with a torn ACL, and that's a fairly big loss for Georgia Tech. He was probably their single best player as an individual on the offense. Certainly, I would say their best skill position player. Gonna be interesting to see how that affects the passing attack going forward against Florida State and into the bowl game.
Yeah, do you have any anticipation of how that will affect the passing attack and maybe the philosophy?
Well, I think the lucky part for Georgia Tech is that opposite him they still have Darren Waller, 6'5", big guy who in the past has kind of struggled with his hands, but this year has made some really great catches. Seems to have really come around as a senior, and so they still have a big, imposing guy on one side of the field, and then on the other you've got Michael Summers, a little more, smaller guy, but he's quick, good hands, and a veteran guy. So I think the two things to watch are going to be blocking. Smelter was a very good blocker, and the perimeter blocking is a huge deal in the Georgia Tech offense. The other thing I think worth watching with Smelter going out is that the pass protection for Georgia Tech this year has not been nearly as good as you would think it is, given that they've only given up like 6 sacks. A lot of times you've seen Justin Thomas use his speed and agility to do things similar to what a Johnny Manziel would have done, run around, buy some time, and a lot of times when that's happened, he's looked for Smelter down the field. And a lot of times I think Smelter was great about doubling back to try and help him out. So if you ever see Thomas running around, which I think there's very much a possibility of with a good Florida State front, it's going to be interesting to see who Thomas is trying to throw to down the field, or how that all turns out.
So the ACC team was announced. The Yellow Jackets littered the second and third teams. No selections on the first team. Do you think there were any particular snubs?
I would say that Shaq Mason, the offensive guard, was a snub from the first team. He's been really solid all year, really the anchor of the offensive line. And in times when they've maybe struggled to run the ball, that's their first instinct, is to go right back to him, get right behind him and just run. So I think he was a bit of a snub from at least from the first team perspective. Certainly, I felt like there were a lot of receivers that didn't get quite enough credit, or a lot of just people in general that didn't get enough credit. DeAndre Smelter, I thought, could have been a second team guy. He was third team instead. The other guy that I think got, for me, that was noticeably missing was Isaiah Johnson, the senior safety who's been one of the defensive MVPs all year for this team. He was not even honorable mention. That was kind of surprising to me to just not see his name anywhere. But I believe Zach Lasky was second team All ACC. I think that he very much earned that, and it's kind of makes you wonder what could have happened if he were not to have missed a few games there in the middle of the season. But he and St. John Days both making the team as running backs, I think, was pretty great, because they were both very, very good this year. The times that they got the chance to run the ball. Thomas is the third-team quarterback. I think that was appropriate too, behind Jameis Winston and Marquise Williams out of North Carolina. Personally, I probably would have flipped those two, Williams and Winston, but not really for me to decide. But yeah, I think there were a few questions there, but I don't know. At the same time, this team hasn't had a whole lot of superstars. It's been a lot of winning by playing a team game and playing for each other without a whole lot of just outstanding repetitive individual performances.
Paul Johnson's been there, what, about 9 years now?
I believe this is year 7.
Okay, so 7 years for Paul Johnson, 2009 being the pinnacle season to date. This could certainly eclipse that with an ACC championship again and going to another major bowl game. ACC Coach of the Year, is this the best job that he's done for one single season?
Oh, I would have to say so. This is a team that was picked to finish 5th in the Coastal. They had one person vote them as the first place team in the division out of, I think, over 100 writers. You know, a team that had very low expectations and has just outperformed everybody. And it's kind of crazy to think, too, how close they are to not having lost either of the 2 games that they did. One interesting note I think that's pretty cool about this year is that with 10 wins, this is now the second time that Johnson has won 10 games at Georgia Tech. He's the first coach to win 10 games in multiple seasons since Bobby Dodd back in the 50s. So he's really outdone himself. I think the offense has really impressed a lot of people. I think the defense has played really well down the stretch in the last 5 games. And I would have to say, yeah, this is one of the most impressive things I've seen, especially given all the people that they lost from last year.
All right, let's talk some Florida State. 3.5-point favorite coming into this game. Again, Florida State, unlike any other conference in America, the team coming into the season, and they ran the table, but suffered through a number of close calls and made it through, while Georgia Tech just seems to be getting better and better. 2 of the more impressive wins over the last 2 weeks in defeating Clemson and Georgia. So just your thoughts about the matchup and any particular items that stand out in regards to having to defeat this Seminole football team.
Well, I think the one thing that kind of has come out that people are finding very interesting is that Florida State is currently on a 28-game winning streak. That winning streak began in the ACC Championship 2 years ago against Georgia Tech. So there's been a lot of joking, you know, about the line that my mom loves to use of, you know, I brought you into this world, I can take you out, type of thing. I think that's going to be a really interesting, you know, discussion piece for this game. As far as the game itself, I think it's actually a pretty bad matchup for Florida State. It was pointed out that they've played like 3 very power rushing teams in a row. It was Boston College, Florida, and I forget who the third one was, but now they're coming to this finesse, you know, a bit of a smoke and mirrors type of team, and I think it's a bit of a different preparation that they would need to have. Now, they did play the Citadel earlier in the year, which runs a very similar offense. There's been a lot of Florida State fans very concerned about injuries. They came out of the Citadel game with a lot of injuries, but at the same time, the 2 points on that are that Georgia Tech has, I think, injured a grand total of maybe like 3 people on the year with their blocking schemes. And even those, I'm pretty sure they still came out and like finished the game, and it wasn't a bad injury at all. And on the other side of it was that the Citadel players coming out of that game were posting things on social media saying, yeah, we were trying to hurt them. So certainly when there's intent there, maybe it changes the story. But I think that the way that Florida State has been playing football recently, with kind of getting behind around halftime and having to come back in the second half, as compared to the way Georgia Tech has played for quite a bit of the year, you know, where they can really, you know, limit the game, shorten the game to single-digit possessions. I think that's a really bad matchup, and if Florida State can't change that formula that we've seen in recent weeks, they're going to have a hard time winning this game because there's been multiple games this year. Miami and Georgia stick out in my mind where the opposing team has had 3 possessions after halftime, and at that point, you know, with what Florida State's been doing going into the half at a deficit, that's not enough time to make up that deficit. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think this is a pretty unique game as compared to what we've seen Florida State play this year.
That's a great point. Everybody talks about the rushing attack versus the defensive mindset and trying to prepare in 6 days for the triple option. You bring up the lack of possessions because retaining the football, not throwing it much, keeping the chains moving, you limit the possessions, and if you're down by 2 scores and you only get 3 or 4 possessions in the second half, then it makes it much more difficult from a time perspective. Is Georgia Tech making any kind of claims to this game? Anything coming out of the players' mouths in regards to what this means to win an ACC championship, take on a defending a national champion with 28 consecutive wins?
I think that they're taking it very seriously, as anybody would. Certainly, they're playing with confidence, having some big wins in the last month or so, and playing as well as they have in the last 5 games. But I think probably what makes this most dangerous is that Georgia Tech is pretty purely playing with house money at this point. If they win this game, there's very little chance that they go to the playoff and they would end up in the Orange Bowl. If they lose this game, they end up in the Orange Bowl, and so there's nothing really for them to lose in this game, and so I think that's one interesting thing to watch as the game goes on, is their attitude, and to see are they playing with any reservations. I would be a little surprised if they are, because again they're playing with house money at this point, and only time will tell what that means.
Yeah, it's funny, Joey. You just pointed out that in a sense they're not playing for anything. I'm not discounting the ACC Championship, which is the reason you play in a conference, but to many, they think about the bowl game, they think about the playoff. Those things are basically not going to be affected by this game, but they can forge a very unique statement that the other conference champions can't, that they play the defending national champion, they stopped the 28-game winning streak, and people will remember that for more a visceral return on the investment, more so than just tangible, you went to the Orange Bowl, well, you would have went anyway kind of thing. This could be something historic for the program.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Another ACC championship in the belt of Paul Johnson would be, again, pretty historic as coaches go. Some people say they didn't win the 2009 one, but I know what I saw. But yeah, I mean, it's very much a thing of they've got nothing to lose here, and to be the first team to beat them in 2 years is quite a statement. And they've played with teams this level, the last few weeks, and even earlier in the year, Miami was playing pretty well, went in and beat them. Clemson, same thing, just completely shut them down on offense. Georgia, I think probably about every bit as good as Florida State is, and they almost got, I would say, screwed out of that game, but at the end of the day, they outplayed Georgia and they won that game, in no fluky nature. So I think that they've got every bit of an ability to win this game, and I think that they will play with a lot of pride, saying that they could beat the first team to beat them in 2 years.
Joey Weaver from SB Nation's From the Rumble Seat. Joey, before we let you go, give us the recipe for a victory, give us the formula, and what we could look at the box score after the game and probably spell out a Georgia Tech win.
Well, I think that the formula is going to need to be a continuation of some of what we've seen from both sides through the last few weeks. We talked about Florida State getting down. If Georgia Tech can score touchdowns in the first half, going to halftime with a lead, that's a big deal. I think the other thing is that the turnover potency that Florida State has versus the turnover potency that Georgia Tech's defense has. The defense, I believe, is top 15 in the nation in creating turnovers. They created 3 last week, and I believe in the last 5 or 6 games they've created multiple turnovers in almost all of them. And Jameis Winston, again, he's thrown 17 interceptions this year. He's shown a potency for turning the ball over. I think if Georgia Tech can create some of those turnovers, keep Florida State off the board, limit possessions, and really kind of move the ball on offense and sustain drives, I have to think it's a pretty good situation for them and a pretty bad situation for Florida State. But as far as what happens, only time will tell.
Well, for the first time in a while, there will be national eyes on the ACC Championship game, because either it was off the radar in regards to affecting the BCS, or in last year's case, it was a foregone conclusion that Florida State would wrap it up in a pretty easy fashion. Thanks so much, Joey, for joining us. Enjoy the game.
Always good to be on here, Mark. Go Jackets.